It feels like a really important milestone to have Rabbi Lopatin here with us, and I'm very, very excited to welcome him. He is the president of YCT, Yeshivat Chovavei Torah Rabbinical School, which is, and this is how it's defined, an Orthodox rabbinical school that teaches an inclusive, open, and welcoming Torah. Just let that phrase hang in the air. It's not something we hear very often in this country. I'm going to say it again because I like it so much. An inclusive, opening, and welcoming Torah. Previously, he was the spiritual leader of Anshe Shalom B'nai Yisrael congregation, which is a modern Orthodox, we don't actually hear that very often either really, a modern Orthodox synagogue in Chicago for 18 years. He received his ordination from Rav Aaron Soloveitchik and Yeshivas Brisk in Chicago and from Yeshiva University as a Wexner Graduate Fellow. He's a Rhodes Scholar with an MPhil in Medieval Arabic Thought from Oxford University. And he is the author of numerous scholarly and popular articles. And we're absolutely thrilled to welcome him here this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's so exciting to be here. And if people can't hear me, I'll use the microphone. But it's such a thrill to be here. And because, well, first of all, I must thank David has been emailing me and Facebooking me and telling me about the idea for, it seems like years, but months, and I'm so excited that this has happened. And yesher koach to everyone here for coming, the rabbis, for coming out on like Erev Rosh Hashanah. Everyone's cooking and preparing, but it is an important issue, and it's an important way of preparing. Slichot's important, and Torah is important. It's an important way of preparing for the new year. And I really feel that what is hopefully happening now in the Jewish community is a renaissance, a revitalization, a reemergence, a resurrection, as in the story that Gila so beautifully told, of modern Orthodoxy. I think modern Orthodoxy was in the 50s and 60s an incredibly vibrant movement with a lot of disagreement and a lot of people that argued with each other and said, what he's saying is apikorsis, and this is heresy, and this is wrong, and this is dangerous. But everyone was arguing together. Everyone was like in the Beit Midrash, so to speak. And I think that for a few decades that sort of there was a lull and not as much openness and not as much fervor. And now I think that in the UK, in Israel, in America, and hopefully elsewhere, that discussion, that vitality is returning. So what I would like to, and I really feel that today, and what I would like to do today, I have like a long, how much? I have till 3 o'clock about. So I definitely want to leave some time for questions and for pushback. You know, again, one of the ideas here is this, that pilpul, you need pilpul in the Beit Midrash. You need real arguing in the Beit Midrash. And it's interesting, Gila, in that beautiful story, Rabbi Yochanan was afraid of arguments. That was an interesting structure, and it was an attack. I really want to change that paradigm, and I'll show you how the a little bit of the Netziv wants to change that paradigm. We need arguments to understand this divine Torah, to understand what Hashem taught us. The only way we're going to get there is if we argue with each other, with respect, with kavod, in the right way, but let's go at it. And so I hope we get to do a little bit of that there, and maybe I'll try to be extra provocative just to please do bring that out. So actually, I was really just going to focus on an incredible journey of Psak of the Aruch Hashulchan of Yechiel Michal Epstein, maybe the greatest posek of the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, the last great posek of Lita, posek acharon of Lita. But there's a little bit in this handout before that from the Netziv. So I apologize. I did this 10 years ago at Limud, and it's not going to be the focus, but we should just spend a few minutes looking at what I think is the most seminal words of the Netziv on on chidush b'halacha, on chidush in Torah, and really coming to terms with how we approach Torah in the modern world. So if you look on page 1, it's translated actually on page 3, but I like to do it in the Hebrew, and I'm sorry, through a lot of high-tech things, it's almost impossible to read in the Hebrew, but we'll do it very, very slowly. And he's very pithy. He's very pithy. So the Netziv was the Rosh Hashiva of the storied Volozhin Yeshiva in the 19th century. The yeshiva was started by Reb Chaim of Volozhin, the student, maybe the greatest student of the Gaon of Vilna. So it was started in the late 18th century. The first real yeshiva to bring people from all over the world to one Beit Midrash. So it wasn't just a local Beit Midrash, but really a national, international yeshiva. Ashkenazic, so it didn't bring that much Sephardi Torah, but a huge leap forward in Torah. And in the 19th century, he was led by Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. There was a lot of infighting and politics going on, and he was challenged by the Soloveitchik, Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, the great-grandfather of the Rav, but he was the Rosh Hashiva there. And the fascinating thing about the Netziv is that on the one hand, his Psak is very frum, Chareidi, what we call it Chareidi, we're all Chareidim in a sense, but it's really not that remarkable. He has a Sefer Meshiv Davar, it's a classic, it's an important work, but it's doesn't come up with such revolutionary ideas. On the other hand, some of his thinking in his work Ha'amek Davar, in his commentary, which is his commentary on the Chumash, and also on his introduction to Hamek Sheila, to his another work of his on an obscure Shielto. But in his sort of philosophical writings, he comes up with blockbuster ideas, with revolutionary ideas. And in a sense, he doesn't put that into practice. There's a book by Menachem Fish, Rational Rabbis, that in the end he talks about the Netziv, and he's sort of disappointed in the Netziv. Like, you're coming out with such amazing things, but I don't see the evidence of, or I don't see the results of this kind of halachic methodology. I think we have to maybe get beyond that and not expect everything from everyone. And every person has their role to move things forward. And I think in a sense, for being a Rosh Hashiva of a Lithuanian yeshiva, it's a very closed system, he really moved us very far. But perhaps we are the heirs of the Netziv, and it's our responsibility to take his theoretical teachings to put them into practice. So what we're going to look at now is his theory. And I believe it really is what he's saying. I don't think you can really argue with it. There's another writer, Gil Pearl, who basically, verifies that this is what he's saying. But to understand that you're not going to see the Netziv doing amazing. For instance, let's do it, and then I'll mention where it just seems the Netziv couldn't move beyond it. So this is all over the Chumash, actually. The Netziv finds this idea in many different psukim, but whenever we mention the menorah or oil for the menorah, the Netziv jumps in. And this happens to be on Parsha Tetzaveh, where it talks about bringing oil to Moshe for the menorah. And again, we're only going to spend a couple of minutes on this because I really want to get into someone who does put this theory into practice, the Aruch Hashulchan. But for now, on page 1 towards the bottom right, we have that sort of arrow, says, I want you to know, Ha'inyan b'chol zeh. I want you to know something, the big issue, the thing that this all boils down to. You should know, the Ora Torah shu tachlit hamishkan, the light of Torah, which is the purpose of the Mishkan. Remember, he's a Lithuanian rabbi, so it's all about Torah. It's not a chassid, it's not about tefillah, it's about Torah. So the purpose of the Mishkan, he says, of the sanctuary, going way back to the times of Moshe, is to bring the Torah into the world. V'ikar misharesh china b'Yisrael, and the thing that allows God to be present in the Jewish people. How does that come? How do we get the Torah into the Jewish people? Ba b'shefa al yidei, comes in abundance by two holy items, vessels, shnei klei kodesh. So in other words, the purpose is getting the Torah into the world. And the vehicles for getting the Torah into the world are two vessels. And so each of these vessels represent a different derech, a different path to getting God's Torah and God's presence into our world. Two of them are the Aron and the Menorah. So the Aron, the ark, this box, represents Liyud. It's the place for the Dibrot, of course, and actually we're seeing in these Parshiot and Vayelech, Nitzavim Vayelech, that it's the place where you put the 10 Commandments. Then there's a machloket, maybe the broken 10 Commandments are there as well. And then there's a machloket, is the Torah in the ark or is on the side of the ark, but it's there. So the ark represents Hadibrot shebichtav, it's the place where the written tablets are. V'gam the tzivui b'Kabbalah ba'al peh. It's not just the written Torah, it's the Torah that's the Kabbalah, that's the Masorah, that's been passed down from generation to generation. That is where it's stored, in the ark. So the ark really represents the knowledge that we've heard from our Rabbeim, from our parents, from our teachers, whoever it is. That is the ark. It's a closed system. It's reading books, it's reading anthologies, it's reading the Sfarim that we have. But he's not satisfied with that. And this is where he's really revolutionary. It's definitely reflecting Gaon Vilna thinking and even Maimonidean thinking, but he puts it in such a beautiful way. Adain ein bezekocha pilpul v'hachidush. It's not enough. I need to come up with something new, with something that has not been said before, chidush. And that comes from arguing. So it's very nice to just accept the Torah, thank you very much. And sort of in Gila's story, we say Rav Kahana not arguing and taking it in. Gemara shows how that's sort of a very challenging thing, but there is a time to take in that Torah. But we need chidush, yehei adam. What do we need in this world? And this, I think he's speaking to us right now, because actually we're living in a generation with lots of beautiful anthologies and collections and art scrolls that are an amazing job. I don't want to, but just anthologizing. But we're looking for new thinking as well. We're looking for sheyehei adam yachol lechadesh me'atzmo dvar halacha she'ino mekubal. We need a person. It's very nice. He uses gender-neutral language here. I don't know if he really intended that, but deep down he intended that. That we need to have a person, l'chadesh me'atzmo, me'atzma, that person can come up from on their own, from inside of them, dvar halacha she'eino mikubal. A piece of halacha, not a nice vort, not just a philosophical, but a piece of halacha she'eino mikubal, that no one has said that before, a new understanding. Not a new law, but a new understanding of a Gemara, a new understanding of a Mishnah, a new understanding of a Rishon, something new that has not been written before, that has not been passed down. And then he says one other important idea, and that is that in order to get all this, you need the menorah, Talmud. And what is Talmud? This power of Talmud. Nitan koach ha-menorah shenichlal bo sheva chochmot. And elsewhere he says sheva chochmot chitzoniot. You need the box is not going to do it. If we just afochba v'afochba, if we're in the box and all we're doing is going through things that we've received and not arguing with them, not challenging them, we're not going to get an important piece of God's Torah. In order to get this, we have to branch out to the Chochmot Chitzoniyot. We have to go into the world. This is Netziv modern Orthodox rabbi, to go into the world and get wisdom from the outside, and that it doesn't lead to just acceptance, it leads to pilpul, it leads to challenging what we've seen before, challenging what you've heard b'Kabbalah, and understanding it in a different way. And so you need these chokhmot chitzoniyot, kol kochot hanidrash lepilpula shel Torah. These powers that are necessary for really arguing with the Torah. And if we don't step outside the Beit Midrash, then we're not going to know how to argue with Torah. We're going to, you get a halacha, you get, that women can do this, men can do this person can do that. Fine, I don't know how to argue with it. I have to step outside and look at a different set of morals or ethics or aesthetics or science. And that gets me to say, wait a second, is the way we understood halacha the correct way? Is that the way God really meant? And what I'd like to do now is look at someone who has done that. There's a lot more we can talk about on page 2, but I want to look at someone who really does that, and that's the Aruch Hashulchan. Now, important caveat, and that starts with page 4, 5, 6, won't do all of it, and it's translated on page 7. Interestingly, the Volozhin Yeshiva was shut down when the Netziv, Naftali Tzvi Berlin, did not allow for secular studies to be brought into the yeshiva. So the Tsarist government wanted them to bring secular studies in, and he said, no, we're not going to do that, and they shut down the yeshiva. So there again, we see he's talking about Chochmot Chitzoniyot. Why don't we bring in these secular studies to the yeshiva and learn about them? And the truth is, there are many different answers. One answer can be that that's not the way he envisioned it. He envisioned it maybe go to some other institution, go outside in some other way, but the yeshiva should be pristine. And just perhaps he really felt that he had this idea in theory, and it was not the time in Volozhin to put this into practice. So it remains a question, but what remains clear is that he believes that to really understand Hashem's Torah, you have to have real arguments, you have to take from the Chochmot Chitzoniyot, the world around us, and you have to come up with chidushim, new things that have not been heard before, new chidushei halacha. So we're going to look at, I think, what's an incredible chidush, a beautiful chidush, and the idea is that the Aruch, it's not a modern, leftist, modernish, progressive kind of thing. It's just trying to understand Torah. Now, there might be a lot of different motives that go into it. I have a feminist agenda, I have this kind of agenda, or that kind of thing. Lots of motives come from the outside. But the point is that we're all struggling to get real Torah. Elsewhere, the Netziv says that it's a free market, and it's the survival of the fittest. And so you have all these different ideas that they're arguing about in the Beit Midrash, and if someone can back it up and can show that it's consistent with all the Gemaras and Rishonim and Acharonim, then it wins. So it doesn't matter what motivated the idea, the Chidush. It matters whether it can survive in the pilpul of the Beit Midrash. So here's an idea that actually, I don't know if it actually has survived the pilpul of the Beit Midrash, but the greatest mind brings it out and at least shows that you should try this. So it deals with Eruvs, and I hear that Eruv is an issue. They're expanding the Eruv in London and even getting the Eruv in London. I come, my good friend David Kaufman is here. We learned at Brisk Yeshiva with Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, and the Briskers are notorious for being anti-Eruv. I mean, they're so anti-Eruv, they say, what you're building in cities is not even an Eruv. An Eruv is wonderful. You're just doing a Tzurat HaPetach. You're just doing an opening, a gateway, and that's not allowed in a city. And, we were through this, when I came to my shul, after learning at Brisk, I asked Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, I said, I'm going to come to this shul in the city, in Lakeview, and they're going to want to put up an Eruv. So what should I do? By then he had softened up a little bit. So he said, okay, just let them do what they want to do. And I shouldn't announce the Eruv. I shouldn't announce that the Eruv is up. Have the president announce the Eruv is up. And so it was a woman president, so that was even better. So we got a lot of things going on there. So he, but still they were always against it. And what we're going to see is and they never told me the Aruch Hashulchan's logic. I want to see I don't know if they told David or anyone else here, but let's go through this because the Aruch Hashulchan comes up with a chidush that is backed up by the Gemara. It's not chadash. It's not some new idea that's coming from somewhere that has no backing, no foundation. It is totally founded, we'll see, in the oldest sources of our tradition, and it works with all the Rishonim, and it's brilliant, and it also allows us to build Eruvs in large cities. So he goes through, on page 4, he starts talking about going back to the Breita, going back to the Gemara, and again, this is the way Chidushim, if you have a new idea, it's got to go back to our sources and sources of authority. And he talks about Sratya and Palatya, and that the Sratya, he says, is the large street, and Palatya is a large shopping center. And he talks about that's where the Gemara, quoting a Breita, talks about Reshut Harabim Gemura, the public way. But then he goes back, let's go back further. Let's not just stop at in the period of the Persians and the Romans and the Greeks and all that. Let's go back to the way it was in the Midbar, in the wilderness. And what you see here is that, and I'm sorry I missed the first lecture, which talked about approach to legends in our tradition. He's going to come up with a chidush. He's going to come up with an innovative idea. The best thing to do is say, this is exactly what happened in Moshe's days. This is not my chidush, it's what happened in the days of Moshe. So first let's go back. He quotes all the Gemaras that say, that how the width of Reshut Harabim has to be at least Tet Zayin Amot, and that's of course from the Agalot in the Midbar, where they were carrying the Mishkan, and therefore the Agalot Shalchu Zeh Betzad Zeh, one on the other side. That's how wide it was. So we're going back to the sources. So something very important. There's an article I mentioned by Steve Boehm in this website, TABS, where he says one of the critical things is reverence for the text, reverence for the tradition. When you want to argue, when you want to twist, when you want to argue for a new understanding, it starts with reverence for the text. It starts with taking all this in and embracing it and saying, this is mine. So the Aruch Hashulchan is saying, Tet Zayin Amot, it's mine. I can see the wagons in the wilderness. I can see them going, and that's how, if you have a street that's less wide than that, then it's not a public way. It's not a Reshut Harabim. By the way, Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, I remember his son, Chaim, was living in Staten Island and had kids and had to push the baby carriage. So actually Staten Island, all the roads are less than Tet Zayin Amot, so it's not really a Reshut Harabim, so they're a little bit more lenient as far as pushing the baby carriage there in Staten Island and relying on that Eruv. But, so we see the Aruch Hashulchan starts out Gemara, Breita, and then goes back to the way it was in the wilderness, and eventually ends up with the idea that, so this is a public way. It's a derech mefulash. It's a way that goes from one side of the city to the other, and it's wide, and it's a Reshut Harabim, and the critical thing is that you can't make a Tzur HaPetach, you can't make one of our kind of Eruvs in this kind of a situation. When you have a wide street that goes through the city, you can't surround it with a bunch of poles and wires and start carrying in it. It's a public domain, midoraita, and the only way to carry in it is like Yerushalayim ilmalei daltotah ninalot balayla chayavot ala mishum reshut harabim. Yerushalayim, they had a wall around it, and the gates were closed. Not just that it had gates, they had to close the gates, and therefore you could carry it. And had you not closed the gates, it would be a public domain, and you couldn't carry in it. So this is a big problem in Aruch Hashulchan's time, everyone's time, in our days, and it's, and is it a problem or not? On the one hand, you could say, this is the halacha, come on. I mean, we don't say, I'm hungry on Yom Kippur, I want to eat. We don't say, I got this juicy piece of gossip, I got to tell it, I'm going to do that. There's certain things that are asur and they're asur. So what about this? If it's asur, it's asur. And the truth is that's sort of the way the Briskers, this very small, tight-knit community around Rav Soloveitchik, around Rav Moshe Feinstein in the Lower East Side, they say, okay, well, we'll deal with it because that's the halacha. But that's not the approach of the Netziv. That's the box. This is what we know, and it's in the box. And that's not the approach of the Aruch Hashulchan. You can't just say, that's the halacha, gamarnu, we're done. You say, this is the halacha, but it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. What's going on? And we're not just going to break it, but we got to hafochba, we got to look at it again. We got to start pilpul and arguing. So first of all, he brings in one layer of argumentation. I think this is very instructive. One layer is what we were told actually at Brisk, what the lenient side is. And that's from the Shulchan Aruch, the Beit Yosef, the Yosef Karo is on the bottom of page 4, bottom left. The Beit Yosef says, Yesh Omrim, there is an opinion, Dechol she'ein shishim ravo ovrim bo b'chol yom, einu reshut harabim. Beautiful heter. As long as you don't have 600,000 people crossing that road every day or going in that street every day, then it's not a public domain. And this is, again, going back to the Midbar, this is the interpretation that, and Rashi says, it's the opinion of Rashi, and it's on page 5 on the top right, on the third line, Zeu dot Rashi. The Eruvin, in Tractate Eruvin, Rashi says this, Dekevan dekol inyanei Shabbat yalfina mi Mishkan. Everything we learn from the wilderness and the Mishkan, Ba'inan dumya de digle midbar, shayusham shishim ravo. 600, it needs to be like the carrying the flags of the wilderness. And there were 600,000 people there. Not people, there were men over the age of 20 and under 60. And so you had 600, this number 600,000. So if you're not like the way it was in the Midbar, you're okay. Now the problem with this, it's a nice heter, and that's what we always heard that, the people that carry an Eruv, they're relying on Rashi. So it's, it goes back, it's Rashi, it's not nobody, and it does go back to the wilderness. It has that, feel, that authentic feel, but the Aruch Hashulchan, I think, he says he doesn't want to. He feels this need, and we'll see even later, this need that people say we have to carry. Everyone is carrying. Everyone's relying on Eruvs. So, on the one hand, he feels the need for a pilpul to struggle with this. He doesn't want to do it in a cheap way. He doesn't want to do it in a, lazy way. If you're going to come up with a chiddush that's real, if you're going to address the pressures that you have from the world around you, you have to make sure that we're doing it in a sincere way, in a way that in a authentic way. So he destroys this leniency, nice leniency of 600,000. Everyone's relying on it. He destroys it. First of all, he says, "I love Rashi, but the opinions that hold of Rashi, that parallel Rashi or follow Rashi." Sefer HaTruma, important, the Smak, they're important names that you learn if you're learning Yerodei, you're learning Halacha, Maharam and Rotenberg and the Rosh, big, good names. But let's listen to who does not accept this 600,000 person leniency, and that says that even with one person traveling, it's still Reshut Harabim, it's a big wide street. So who are the people that are against Rashi? The Rif, Rabbi Yisrael Fassi, the Rambam, Rabbeinu Tam, the Rashban, the Ramban, the Rashba, the Ritva, the Ran, the Maggid Mishnah, Rivash, a gazillion, and the big names, and the big names in halacha are against this. So first of all, he says the vast majority of poskim, of Rishonim, do not hold of Rashi. They reject Rashi. Now there are times sometimes when Rashi has a chumrah that we do follow Rashi. Sometimes the Bahag, the Baal Dolot has a chumrah we follow. Sometimes we're afraid of Rashi. Shmurim, matzah ashira, so egg matzah. The reason Ashkenazim don't eat egg matzah is, Rashi, we're worried about Rashi has an opinion that interprets the Gemara that it's aser. But Rashi's not enough with his small group to rely on being over a d'oraita, Torah violation on Shabbat, carrying. Because again, we're talking about what is a Reshut Harabim. Reshut Harabim is chayav midoraita. So we're going to rely on a minority opinion for carrying. So then he does even more. He says, even if you accept Rashi, and this is on the top left of page 5, so he's really trying to be not just, and I think this is very instructive for those of us in the modern Orthodox community who want to push a lot of issues and feel sensitive to a lot of issues, whether it's gender issues, whether it's inclusion issues, conversions, all sorts of the issues that hopefully will come up in the next day or two. You have to do it in an authentic way. You have to come up with a real strong argument. You can't just rely on a weak argument. It reminds me a little bit of in the conservative movement when they relied on a kind of a tricky argument to allow people to drive to shul. And really the thrust of that argument was it's probably just a derabanan to drive in a car because it's you're not really fire and all that. And once it's a rabbinic, then for the public need, we can allow it. So I don't want to simplify it, but that's sort of the crux. And I think they suffered a lot, and anyone would suffer a lot if you're relying on a very flimsy leniency for something that's very serious. But that doesn't mean that you ignore the need. So it doesn't mean that you ignore the thousands of people that need to push their babies to shul and come to shul and share meals together and all the other things that an Eruv allows you to do to bring the community together. Don't ignore that. Just don't rely on something that's easy when it perhaps is not a real good argument. So on the left-hand side of page 5, he says, Levadze, he says, I'll show you the different sources. Rashi, even Rashi would not agree with this leniency because Eino sheyehei shishim revo ovrimbo. He says it's not that you need 600,000 people to cross that highway or walk on that highway on a Shabbat or on a weekday, but rather it's only that they have the possibility of walking. It should be a cholet lavorbo. It's only that even Rashi, who says, don't worry, it's not a Reshut Harabim if you don't have 600,000 people, he doesn't mean that you need that. And that's, by the way, it's even some major highways, the Ryan Expressway in Chicago, they don't have 600,000 cars every day. But the key thing is it wide enough, is it big enough for the possibility of 600,000 people crossing? And it brings a proof from Sefer Nehemiah, where Nehemiah, they get all worked up. Psak al chil Shabbat, he gets all worked up, and there were only 400,000 people living in Israel at the time, according to tradition. So why did he get so worked up about it if it wasn't, according to Rashi, it wasn't even a Reshut Harabim? So he says, first of all, you can't rely on Rashi anyway, it's a minority opinion. Second of all, even Rashi won't agree with you. Rashi will not carry if it's a wide through street through the city if there's a possibility of 600,000 people. So then he says something just beautiful, a little bit of humor. So he says, it's the middle of that paragraph on the left-hand side of page 5. Im kain kol adrachim shalom him Reshut Harabim. So the Aruch Hashulchan, what am I going to do? They're all public ways now, because even the Rashi opinion, if they're wide streets, it's a public way. And he says, it's not going to help Ha'eruv nitpashtu barov arei Yisrael, that there are erus everywhere. Now, I don't think he just means nebuch, what am I going to do? I got to do something. I think he means that there is something going on. If there are erus everywhere, if from Jews are who care about, care everything on Shabbat, every detail, are accepting the eruv, it must mean something's going on. And for harbei me'ot shanim, for hundreds of years, we can't just reject. And I think this is a modern Orthodox idea. This is looking out into what's going on in the Jewish world and saying we can't just reject this. And he says, Uchilu bat kol, I don't know, this is like a little humor, like a bat kol, yatsa halacha kashita zo. Says, what people I think are relying on is something, we don't listen to a bat kol, a heavenly voice. It's as if people are hearing a heavenly voice says, follow this opinion of Rashi, which, as he's proven, is not even Rashi's opinion. But then he says, he says, Im banu, it's not going to work. Okay, lolavat shali saitu. And this I think is these next three words are important. Ela nireh kemishtagim. We will seem like we're crazy. If a rabbi says not to carry in the eruv, he'll seem like he's crazy. Now, on the one hand, so everyone thought Avraham was crazy, and everyone thought, when we didn't believe in infanticide, that was crazy, and a lot of crazy Jewish ideas. But on the other hand, I think he says we got to take it seriously. When our system of morality in the Jewish community looks crazy and looks strange, we got to think about it. Maybe we'll find out that it is like Avraham Avinu, that it's monotheism and it's crazy, but it's the right thing. But maybe if we have to pay attention to that, and maybe we'll find that, what we thought was the halacha is not really the halacha. So he ends this paragraph by saying that Yanki mitzvah v'chova lamed zchut al klal Yisrael. It's an obligation to find the benefit, to see the merit in what Jews are doing. Lachein samti et libi lahamtzi eze heter. So I made it my task. I'm going to work on finding some kind of heter. Now you could read this in a more cynical way and say, look, that nebuch, everyone's carrying, I got to find a way of finding some kind of heter, some kind of flimsy leniency. But we see from before, that's not really what he likes doing, because it has to be a true heter. Really what this does is this is something from the outside is going to get him to re-examine our understanding of halacha. So it could be some philosophy from the outside, or it could be a reality from the world he lives in where people are carrying. But it's outside the Beit Midrash, and it's outside the box of the Aron, where the Torah is. And he sees it as a chova to work on this issue. And what he discovers, I think, is something just so beautiful, so incredible. And that is, Nira Laniat Daiti is on the bottom left. When we look carefully, how do we know that carrying is usher in the Torah? How do we know that it's usher to carry, hotzah b'Torah? Where do we see it in the Torah? So he goes back again. He's going back to the sources. He's not, going to say, he's going to start with love and reverence for Torah. And he quotes the Gemara, which talks about, it quotes a pasuk that that the people stopped bringing stuff for the Mikdash. And Moshe, Hechan Hava Yativ Machane Levia, Moshe was sitting in the Levite camp, and therefore Machane Levia Reshut Harabim Havai. So therefore we know the reason they stopped bringing, which is not the Pshat in the Chumash, but this is, Gemara says, the reason they stopped bringing was Moshe was in Reshut Harabim, in the Levite camp. So he says, wait a sec, why just Moshe, the whole camp? According to the Mefarshim, and certainly the Rambam, and the ones that disagree with it, the whole camp where the Israelites were, was a Reshut Harabim, were wide streets. Remember, the agalot had to get through, the wagons had to get through, and they were through streets, north, south, east, west. So why does the Gemara say that only Machaneh Leviah, only the Levite camp where Moshe was, is a Reshut Harabim? They should all be Reshut Harabim. So he builds his theory on this, and I think it's a very intriguing theory. And basically, it's on page 6 in paragraph Kaf. Basically, what he says is the Talmud, the period of the Talmud where people lived then, they had courtyards that went into one major street. That was an aberration, really, in a sense. The old way, the way it was in the Midbar, was you had multiple streets, and if you wanted to get out of the Machaneh, they sent a lot of people outside of the camp. There were different ways of going. There were multiple ways. I don't know what it's like in London. I imagine in London there are different ways of getting out of the city. And New York, thank God I use Waze. And sometimes, you take the Harlem River Drive or FDR, and sometimes the West Side Highway. Different ways of getting out of the city and into the city. And that's the way it was in the Midbar, in the wilderness. And to have a Reshut Harabim, it's a strange way. Reshut Harabim is the exception. He says, Inyan Reshut Harabim kenu de'elio bi'Iraq Reshut Harabim echad lishnei tzadei ha'ir mizrach u'marav v'chen Reshut Harabim acher litzfon l'darom. So it's unusual. The way to have Reshut Harabim, it has to be a thoroughfare that everyone uses, north, south, east, west. And that's the only way. The Midbar didn't have that. When the Torah was revealed, and when the laws of Shabbat were revealed, they had multiple routes in the Machaneh. You could go through the Ruvain camp, and you could go through Yehuda camp, all the different camps, and many multiple ways, and therefore, none of them were Reshut Harabim. When you have choice, when you have different routes, they're not Reshut Harabim. Reshut Harabim has to be the Reshut of everybody, where everyone is forced to take that route. And the Midbar and the wilderness, they did not have that. The only case in the Midbar where they had to take one route, one way, was Machaneh Leviah, to Moshe's tent. There was only one way to get in there. It was, delay, like I was at the Hamptons. To get to East Hampton, the shishiest area on Long Island, there's one road, and you can't have one road. And if a car breaks down, you're stuck. So that's the way it was to Machaneh Leviah, to Moshe's camp. You got to take that one way. But otherwise, all the other ways, there was no Reshut Harabim. So that's why the Gemara says, Reshut Harabim, we learned from Machaneh Leviah, from Moshe's camp. But everywhere else, it's not a Reshut Harabim. So the Aruch Hashulchan says, in the time of the Gemara, all the alleyways went into this one major thoroughfare that went from maybe the Cardo, that went from one end of the city to the other. But in our cities that we have now, we in Europe in the late 19th century, early 20th century, we are like the Midbar. We're like in the wilderness. No more Reshut Harabim, except if it's a strange city that has only one route and one way of getting out of the city. And so what the Aruch Hashulchan does, so in a brilliant way, and I never heard this from the Briskers, I never heard this in yeshiva, what he does is he says, even the Rambam and the Rif, all of you that disagree with Rashi, don't worry about 600,000. The question is it multiple routes or is it a single road? And he says, in the cities of Europe, it's multiple roads. And I would guess that in most cities, or in all the cities where there are Erus, there are multiple roads. So there's no Reshut Harabim, and therefore you can make an Eruv, you can make a Tzurat HaPetach. So what he does brilliantly is he's not relying on, Rashi says it, but everyone disagrees with him. He's not relying on that. He's not relying on a misread of Rashi, where really Rashi doesn't even mean that. He's totally going back to the sources. Let's take us back 3,500 years to the wilderness, and let's see what's going on in the wilderness, and showing that today's crazy cities in the 19th, 20th century reflect what was going on there. He's doing chidush. He's giving us something new. No one has said this theory before. And I don't even know, and there's the footnotes here. This version of the Aruch Hashulchan has the footnotes of Piskei Mishnah Brura. So the Chavetz Chaim doesn't accept this. It's like, I don't want to go. It's like Rashi, 600,000, or don't accept Rashi. You should be machmir, don't accept Rashi. If you want to be lenient, accept Rashi, 600,000. He's lost. All this stuff is lost on the Mishnah Brura. They're contemporaries, and I don't know if he really saw this, but this is an argument that represents chidush. It represents sensitivity for what's going on outside the world. And you see someone struggling to take their kid to shul, take their baby to be able to come to shul, and you say, ouch, does our halacha really say that there's no way of making that happen? Now, or the other way, you could say it's so crazy, Erus, you're just carrying all the time, that's ridiculous. But it's not so ridiculous when you go back to the early camp in the days of Moshe, when there was no Torah prohibition against carrying anywhere in that machaneh, except going to Moshe's tent. There you couldn't go. That was a public domain. So I think that the Aruch Hashulchan, who's, I remember one of our Rabbeim calling him, he's a maverick. He doesn't just accept what he gets. A lot of his motivation is limud zchut. A lot of his motivation is like the Tosafists, that they see the halacha is one way, and they see the minhag, what everyone's doing, is different. And, these are, again, pious people. They can't really be wrong, so let's try to resolve this. So that is a motivation. That's different than saying, I just feel this is immoral to do this. But I don't think it's essentially different. I think what you're doing is you're letting outside chokhmot chitzoniot, outside factors and outside realities shake up what's in that box, that Torah box, begin arguing, and make you think in a new way, begin the pilpul. And I think we have to be really strict and careful about how we're coming up with answers, and not just accepting any idea, but on the other hand, when the system works, when we allow ourselves to listen to that outside world, we're going to come up with brilliant chidushim like the Aruch Hashulchan, which also, on many levels, it's so beautiful. First of all, it takes us back to the days of Moshe Rabbeinu, and everyone's running around and imagining what it was like then. But also, I think I'm a free market guy, and I'm a big believer in competition. And this is really justifying that the ideal, the machaneh HaKadosh of the machaneh that we had in the wilderness had many different routes. Not everyone had to take the same route. You can go different routes. There was choice. And so it has even a hashkafic, a philosophical side to it. And basically what it's saying is that on Shabbat, what was prohibited from the Torah was this singular way of doing it. When you could only go one way, then that's what the Torah didn't want you carrying in. But otherwise, it's D'Rabbanan, it's a Carmelite, and you have to work on setting up an Eruv and everything that involves, not just the wires, but shared food, a shared loaf of bread, or 2 loaves of bread, whatever, box of matzah, whatever it is. So once we accept this idea of that the Torah really only had one very specific thing in mind to prohibit, and beyond that, it was very open to us making an arrangement where we could carry on Shabbat, then I think just a lot of beautiful things flow that are new, that were never mentioned before, and they would have never been released. This Torah of the Aruch Hashulchan would never have been released had it not been for the frustration of the Aruch Hashulchan and seeing what's going on and saying, I got to come up with a solution. So I think that that's really where we are today. I think it's great to be frustrated. It's great to argue. it's great to bring in all the outside stuff. This guy's philosophy, that person's philosophy. That's all good. Everyone's doing this, so why aren't we doing it? Great, that's an argument, but that gets the halachic juices running. Then you go back to the Gemara and you look at the way the Gemara talks about the Rishonim. And the beautiful, elegant thing about this is it works for the Rambam. It works for all the Rishonim. So it's l'chulei alma. Everyone accepts this, then when there are multiple ways. So you go from a kvetchadika kind of leniency to one that's elegant and real, and I think has a lot of meaning. So I want to stop now and open up for some questions and some pushback, and both about sort of the Nitziv's idea of chochmot chitzoniot, and also about the Aruch Hashulchan, this whole idea of, are we losing, maybe we're losing something by carrying on Shabbat. And so yes.
Thank you very much. Wonderful talk. You're proposing two models here of progressive Kiddush, right? One says, and both have an outside impetus. But in one case, you might be more willing to go with a minority decision, to rely on a leniency. And we're just digging to find that one text that will allow us to make the change. It's all about the change. And the case that you present here is the case where, well, it's much more backed up by the texts.
Mm-hmm.
So, are you saying we should only go with the second one? Are you saying if we can, we should go with the second one? Because there will be cases where there's more impetus from the outside, and we won't be able to do it, no matter what Chochmah will bring to the text. What in those cases?
Very good. That's great. That's a great question. I think that we should definitely strive for not a minority opinion. And I think sometimes I'm thinking of Daniel Sperber bringing in Kavod Habriot when he talks about type of minyanim that he allows, type of participation in services that he allows. He brings in Kavod Habriot. I think that at least we should strive for this Aruch Hashulchan model, that at least we should strive to say we're not just relying on a leniency, on a minority opinion, that really if you would ask the Chachmei HaTalmud, they would all agree. I have this little thing that Nebuch got published, but no one's read the journal it's in, and I'm trying to peddle it, but wherever I can. So it's the idea that the synagogue, that Kavod HaTzibur applies only to a shul that's really like a public place. Like in Israel, like a shul where all of you come in to daven. It's not like a community and a home and a family. Many shuls in England, in America, wherever, in Israel, strive to be more than just a place to daven, a tzibur. They really try to be much more of a home, of a family. And in that case, I would argue that l'chulei alma, all the opinions that say that it's kavod tzibur, a woman can't do this, or it's zila milta, it's wrong if a woman takes a public role, would say, we're only talking about it in tzibur, but if it's a home environment or a shul that's like a home, then of course it's mutter. So now, putting aside whether anyone sort of buys that change or that transformation, but that's the direction I think we should go on, where we say the l'chulei alma. So I think Rabbi Sperber would probably argue that everyone would say that based on Kvod Habriot, like if you asked all the Rishonim and all the Bala, Chazal, that they would say, of course, if it's the situation where there's a diminution of Kvod Habriot, then of course, allow for that, and Kvod HaTzibur has to take a back seat. I think that's what he would argue, not just that I'm not relying on some minority opinions. So I think that's the direction to go in. It's a very good point of, maybe there will be times when there is a short-term solution or something like that, where we have to rely on a minority opinion. It's, Tzorach Gadol, there's a lot of talk about that you can rely on Mutzav Rabbi Shimon, Lismach Alav B'Shat HaTchak, that there are, even the Gemara talks about that you can rely on minority opinions when it's a Shat HaTchak. But I don't think that's a healthy long-term halachic situation to be in, that you don't want to just be always living. That's a Shat HaTchak, that's a temporary fix. And long-term, I think we do want to look for these kind of new understandings that it really embraces the majority.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yeah.
It seems that in this specific example, as with others, there's a freedom of thought, but to justify a conservatism in practice. So in this case, he's backwards retrospectively justifying something that's existed for a long time. So he's using creativity to, as you say, limit its hood. However, is that a different case to, again, using that methodology to then justify something new in practice or a new minhag that's not existed before? Same situation, or is that different?
Right. Very great. So something new, like certain people participate. I'd say women. I don't always get to women's issues, but
it's really fun.
But I think that it is I'm sort of this school. I think it's a postmodern, very postmodern school where you're always interpreting. You're saying this really happened. I mean, even saying that, going back 3,500 years, this is what happened in the wilderness. You're imposing our understanding on history. So I think it's very postmodern, and I'd like to take it even further, and that is, saying. Certainly, like, let's say with the issue of women rabbis, going back to, the Chidah, and the Rishon has the category of Rabbanit, and that these really did exist before, even we didn't think about it. And if you're looking at the question of leadership, of service, different things it's almost like a radical postmodern thing that we're really not doing anything new. We're really going back to the basic values that we had. And it's actually in Ger Katan, it actually exists with, there was a Psak in the 18th, there was a debate in the 19th century Germany about whether there's Zera Kodesh, whether a person who has a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother has like a little bit of a Pintel Yid, a Yiddish, seed in him or her. And it sort of was Paskin mostly not. And then Rav Elyashiv and some others have really brought it back. Halacha l'maaseh, really reaching out to people to convert them because they have a Jewish father. So that's sort of a case of something that maybe has been dormant and then reawakening it. So I think in the case of... I try to argue there's a difference between Chadash and Chidush. That Chassam Sofer said Chadash Asur Min HaTorah, and that's, I don't know if he really meant that, but you could say that we're not looking for things that are totally new, but things that are really getting us back to the values that we always had. I think I was talking to Yitz Greenberg about some of the parsha that talk about you got to kill this and you got to kill this and kill Amalek and kill the Shiva Amim and the women and the children, and that Chazal really reinterpreted these, and the Ramban in a radical way really reinterprets that you can bring everyone in and welcome them to your society, and what they're really doing is, he said, in a covenantal way, really not changing the Torah, but really coming back to what the Torah really meant. And so I think that's a way of doing it. It might be things that look different, but argue that essentially they're really not different. Maybe I'm just thinking one argument would be, we want to enable people to participate in the services. So now maybe it has more of a gender view, a gender manifestation. But in the past, you definitely were including people that could not pronounce things properly. There were fights with Yaakov Emden. He was against blind people getting aliyot. They gave people aliyot in his shul when he was out of town. He got very angry. But there was this sense of being inclusive. So maybe that's sort of the direction, that we're really not doing anything essentially new. Yeah, we'll have new manifestations, but it's really continuing a value that we've had, putting it into practice.
Thank you.
I'm quite interested in your use of the word authentic. I'm also quite troubled by it. I'm always worried when words, traditional, authentic, are used. I mean, it was very funny when you said Chadash Asur bin Torah. I don't think he really meant it. You know, that's a very postmodern reading, right? Of somebody who said something in a way quite clearly. So when you say authentic, how does, say, the Aruch Hashulchan's postmodern reading of text, how is that classified as authentic? Or is it using text itself, which you mean is authentic? Or is it just the text that is authentic? So.
Great. It's a very good challenge. It's a strange word, difficult word, and it's a problematic word. I agree. I think I see authentic as what the Netziv says, if it survives the pilpul of the Beit HaMidrash. So the Netziv talks about, and we didn't do it, but a little bit later, that Aaron, there's a difference between Aaron and Moshe. Moshe is the menorah and Aaron is the ark. And Aaron gives a psak halacha, a temporary psak, and it might not be real. It works for then, it's the truth, it's the halacha for that moment, but it's not necessarily lasting. Moshe, who was the Baal HaChidush, a little ironic but counterintuitive, but he was the Baal HaChidush, he eventually got to something that was true, that was authentic through argumentation. And that also, truth is, probably changes over time, but so what I mean is really that something that can survive the crucible of all the Batei Midrash in this world over time, that's what I would see as authentic. But it might be something that's fleeting, that changes, and it's, who knows what's authentic? We only know what's authentic by really surviving all those arguments. I have just a quick thing on the Chatam Sofer. It's a quick vort. Can I do? Let's come to your question first, then I will see if we have time.
Following up on that, I was going to ask you what the role of the minority view is, but would you say that the minority view is not authentic because it doesn't survive the test of time?
Well, I think, and then that's the classic Talmudic view of the minority opinion, that eventually that it can come back and it can retake the argument.
How could it, if your perspective is that we shouldn't follow the minority view? I mean, how will it ever come back?
Right. You're right. That's a good question. I think that the minority view is. Well, you're right that in amongst. Let's think of this case of the Aruch Hashulchan here. So it started out with in the end of the day, it's the Aruch Hashulchan creates a majority view that buttresses this minority view. So he's really saving Rashi. Even Rashi's the minority view. He needs to bring in a majority view that allows. It's what Rashi. It's not agreeing with that 600,000 people, but it is putting into effect that people can carry in Eruvs. So I think that in a sense we actually maybe do have to build these majority fortresses around minority views, really. That, the minority view gets us to think and gets us to question and begins the shake-up and the pilpul, but ultimately we go to it won't be the minority view that we're supporting, but it's something that is reflective of the minority view.
Do you want to give your vote?
Yeah, I'll give. So it's a quick vote. It's
okay.
On the Chatam Sofer, so it's Chadash Asur min Torah. It'll fit into this. But another thing that Briskers are very strict about is the Easter Chadash, of eating the new flour before the second day of Pesach. The new wheat, you're not allowed to eat it in Eretz Yisrael, and maybe many say in the diaspora. So, but the amazing thing about Chadash is Asur midaraita. It's a question, but maybe it's totally Asur from the Torah. That's why, the Briskers go crazy. Don't worry about Chalav Yisrael. Worry about Chadash. The Chalav Yisrael gets all the press. But Chadash, everyone's eating bread all year round. They don't pay any attention. So it is Asur min Torah. But the amazing thing about Chadash, about something new, the new flour, is that if you hold on to it for enough time, through the second day of Pesach, it becomes mutter. It becomes what's permissible. So likewise, you might have an idea that sounds terrible, it's new, it's radical. if it can survive through the second day of Pesach, and it can survive enough arguments, then it becomes mutar. So I don't know if the Chatam Sofer intended that, but
Let's hope. That's great. Yes.
On the previous question, I thought that one of the most powerful arguments against the way that compendia of Jewish law omitted the sources, just gave the majority views, was precisely that the minority view could one day hold the fort and reappear. And without knowing what the minority view was, you were back in the box.
yeah, but I don't know how. I agree with you. You're right. I don't know how if it's a minority view of Rishonim, then I don't know how we're going to reawaken it with Acharonim who agree with it, or it's a minority view of Tanaim, how we're going to go back. I think one of the arguments also is that not suppressing the sources and then coming up and saying, this actually is the majority view. It was considered, maybe Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, maybe the Rambam, whoever, considered a minority view, but it really is. It's with a different understanding, it's the majority view. So I don't know enough actually where those shifts take place. I know it's interesting because the way Rav Ovadia Yosef paskins, it's very much weighing majority and minority that way and how many sources. But when you talk to people like Rav Aaron Soloveitchik and even Rav Moshe Feinstein, when you read his tshuva, it's not, sometimes he does rely on a one posek that. So I wonder if, and this gets back to your question, maybe we can finesse what seemed like a minority view was buttressed by very powerful ideas. Eliezer Berkovitz goes into this a little bit also, that when there's nimuko imo and there's svara that goes with it, it can transform a minority view into the equivalent of a majority view. But I think we still have to move in that direction, not just relying on a minority view, but really beefing up that minority view and making it into something that has the equivalence or the equivalence as a majority view.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Okay, modern Orthodoxy survives.